Hello, and welcome to Story Starters. I'm Miss Kayla, the children's librarian at the Dubuque County Library, and today the book is Twinchantment by Elise Allen. So I'll read the first couple chapters, and you can settle in at home to listen while I read. Twinchantment by Elise Allen. The Kingdom of Kaloon, Magic Eradication Act. In acknowledgement of the grievous harm visited upon King Lamar by practitioners of the dark art of magic, the following rules shall now and forever forward be enforced in the Kingdom of Kaloon. Only designated keepers of the light may practice magic, and only as part of their duty to protect Kaloon. There shall be no other practice of magic within the kingdom's limits. To ensure this, those with magical abilities must vacate the kingdom immediately. Should a person develop magical abilities, they must report directly to the Keepers of the Light, register their skills, then prepare for mandatory relocation outside the kingdom. All magical amulets, charms, and other talismans are strictly prohibited. Children born with physical evidence for a propensity for magic may not be raised in the kingdom, and instead shall be surrendered to the Keepers of the Light for rehoming. Such physical evidence includes polydactyly, extra fingers or toes, a caul over the face at birth, left-handedness, should it persist after active retraining, twinhood. These rules are absolute. Any defiance will be answered with swift and certain punishment, ranging from life imprisonment to exile to execution. So it is written and sealed from this day forward. Prologue. Magic had brought the dark times to the kingdom of Kaloon, and only magic, tightly controlled magic, could sweep them away again. Every Kaloonian knew the story. The nobles of the castle, the merchants of the village, and the farmers of the vast countryside had all taught it to their children. Anyone could describe how the dark mage Maldavon hid his true nature for years. He pretended his magic was simple and harmless. He won everyone's trust, performing tricks at local festivals and making mystical poultices to heal wounds and ailments. Even the great King Lamar had admired Maldavon, had even invited him to live in the castle. It was a fatal mistake. At exactly midnight on the day of King Lamar's son's Ascension Day, the day Prince Alistair turned 12 and would officially take his place in the royal line, Maldavon and his followers swept through the castle, unleashing spells and curses that extinguished the lives of everyone in their path. By the time King Lamar understood what was happening, many in the palace had already fallen. The king immediately summoned his army, but their strength and weapons were nothing in the face of Maldavon's hateful magic. With a flick of a finger or a muttered syllable, the mage could steal the air from their lungs or thicken the blood in their veins. Despite the danger, King Lamar wanted to fight Maldavon himself, but his personal guard wouldn't let him. Though the king raged and fought against them, his guard overpowered him and brought him into a secret chamber of the castle for his own protection. It should have been a pointless ploy. Hidden nooks and tunnels were no match for Maldavon. His very senses were magical. He had the power to find anyone he wanted and destroy them with barely a thought. And he would have succeeded had it not been for a single man, a mage who only used his power for good. As Grossalor would later tell it, he was reading in bed when he heard the commotion. Not with his ears, he was miles away. Back then, He had already lived a very long life and found simple happiness on the sprawling farm in the outskirts of Kaloon, surrounded by others like himself. He was a mage, but unlike Maldavan, he didn't want attention or accolades. He only wanted to spend time with his friends and family, other mages with the same philosophy. They could create anything they needed, so they lived together in harmony and left the rest of Kaloon alone. Yet, on this night, anguish seared like lightning through Grossalor's head. He heard terrified screams and felt each life ripped away as if it were part of his own soul. He knew instantly what was happening, and although he'd never dreamed of approaching the castle, he knew what he had to do. Humble Grossalor would always decline to talk about what happened next. Stories passed down through the years simply said that Grossalor and his allies appeared at the palace out of nowhere. What they did is a mystery, but by the time they were done, Maldavan and all his followers were in Grossalor's custody, and King Lamar was safe. His family, however, wasn't so lucky. Most of them had perished. His wife, his siblings, his children, even Prince Alistair, who just turned 12 that day. Only one member of King Lamar's family survived, the second of his 6 children, Prince Regland. Just 1 year younger than his older brother, Prince Regland was now the one who'd have an ascension ceremony at age 12. But King Lamar swore no dark mages would get in the way this time. He enacted the Magic Eradication Act, forever banning all magic from Kaloon, except that which would be used to protect it. He insisted Grossalor take charge of securing the kingdom at all costs. At his Majesty's decree, Grossalor formed the Keepers of the Light. From the beginning, this group of magical men and women dedicated themselves to eradicating all dark magic from the land. Hand in hand with the royal family, Grossalor and his keepers kept Kaloon safe for generations. Dressed in their yellow cloaks and doublets, they were like glimpses of the sun and gave Kaloonians the same warm feeling of comfort. Kaloonians born in the years after the Magic Eradication Act couldn't even imagine a world where magic was allowed to run rampant, nor would they want to. The very idea was terrifying. Grossalor himself was the only person old enough to remember that time clearly, and his stories made it sound terrible. Of course, Grossalor didn't look his age, nor did any of the older keepers. Their timeless youth and vitality were the only outward signs of their powerful magic. They didn't boast about this or showcase it, though. None of the keepers spoke about magic. They saw their power as a duty to bear, one to protect the kingdom they loved. Like when they saved the life of King Lamar's great-great-grandson's firstborn child, Princess Florissa. It happened at a party in Queen Latonia and King Edwin's high-ceilinged throne room. The space was so stuffed with celebratory banners and bunting, it was a wonder there was any room for people. Yet its stone walls seemed to echo with the voices of the whole kingdom. Men, women, and children crammed together, sweating in their finest hand-stitched brocade dresses and tunics. They ignored the oppressively thick air and stood on tiptoe, the ones in the back stretching and straining to see the king and his very pregnant queen on their rich purple thrones. With the exception of the keepers in their ever-present yellow, purple was the color of the day. It was Queen Latonia's favorite, and everyone wanted to please her. She and King Edwin were the most beloved royal couple ever to rule Kaloon, the only royal couple who had married for love. King Edwin had met his bride while shopping in the village. Her family owned a cheese shop. One look at her mane of dark curls, laughing brown eyes, and sparkling smile, and he was smitten. Latonia had loved him just as much, but wasn't sure she could trust the fancies of a king. He wooed her tirelessly for an entire year. When she finally said she'd marry him, the whole kingdom celebrated for weeks. Now, nearly 9 months later, she glowed with joy as she rested one hand on her giant belly and addressed her people. Friends, family, fellow colonians, I am so honored you've all joined King Edwin and me today to share our happiness as what happened next moved too quickly for anyone to intervene. Gilward, the court jester, and a lanky noodle of a man, somehow muscled to the front of the crowd. In a single motion, he ripped his hands from his pockets, thrust his arms out like talons, and screamed arcane words at the top of his lungs. Bright light filled the throne room, so intense it hurt, and everyone shut their eyes and turned away. When they opened them again, the light was gone. But Queen Latonia stood on the dais, staring down at her sworn belly in horror as a thick green mist swirled around it. The king leapt to his feet and drew his sword. "What did you do?" he roared down at Gilward. "What did you do?" In an instant, Grossalor magically appeared at Gilward's side. His whole body sparkled with his unique magical signature, and those same sparkles glistened on Gilward as he slammed to his knees, his forehead banging on the floor and his arms jerking painfully behind his back. He rose as if yanked by the elbows, till he hung a foot off the floor, and then he changed. As those around him watched, in a mix of awe and horror, Gilward shrank within his purple unitard. His skin crumpled closer to his bones, suddenly crepe thin and wrinkled. Eyes wide with terror, he turned desperately to Grossalor. "What are you doing to me?" he croaked in a suddenly ancient voice. "Nothing," Grossalor said impassively. "Whatever's happening to you, it isn't me." And it wasn't. Every witness said Grossalor's magical signature, those sparkles, glistened only around Gilward's elbows, from which the jester dangled as if on a hook. They were nowhere else on his swiftly deteriorating body. Just then Mitzi, a young woman from the kitchen staff, shrieked from across the room. "The mist!" She thrust her arm out to point at Queen Latonia. "It's going into her body!" King Edwin gasped and ran to his wife as she looked down at her belly and screamed. Mitzi was right. The thick mist that had been swirling around her was now seeping through her gown and into her womb. The queen tried to claw it away, crying out in panic, but it wouldn't stop. It sank into her until every wisp was gone. Then Latonia jolted upright in a bolt of white-hot pain. As a bolt of white-hot pain shot through her body, she yowled in agony. No one saw anything else after that. The royal nurse Katya heaved her enormous body onto the dais and ushered Queen Latonia away, King Edwin by her side the whole time. Grossalor blinked onto the dais to join them, leaving Gilward to be ushered out of the room in the grip of a craggy-faced keeper called Rowan. Within moments, everyone involved with the incident was gone, leaving only a handful of keepers to stay with the crowd and keep them calm and quiet, as everyone anxiously waited to hear what had happened. When Grossalor reappeared on the dais an hour later, his smile glowed almost as brightly as his yellow doublet. "May the light keep us all," he said. "The queen is fine, and so is her new baby girl. Long live Princess Florissa." Almost 12 years later. Chapter 1. Sarah. Bong, bong, bong. Again and again the bell in the castle's highest turret bonged. With each repetition, the knot in Sarah's stomach tightened. She was late, supremely late, unprincessly late, and there was absolutely no way she could make it across the fields, past the stables, through the gardens, and up the endless steps to the throne room's balcony before the 10th bong of the bell. No way at all, unless she ran faster than she'd ever run in her life. She took a deep breath, then sprinted top speed for about a second. Then she tripped over the hem of her skirt and belly flopped onto the grass. She groaned. This is the worst. She dragged herself to her feet and peered down at her favorite rose-red dress. Grass stains all down the front. Of course. Worser than worst. For a second, Sarah considered blowing off the weekly address entirely, but that would have been an even huger disaster. Every time she went to one of Kaloon's county festivals and spent time among her people, they always told her how much they loved the weekly address. They said they eagerly awaited that reliable break in their work week, which made them feel connected to the royal family, even when there was nothing to report. If Sarah didn't show up, Kaloonians would worry, and they'd talk. And no matter how much Kaloon loved her, some people would definitely spread stories about where Princess Flisara had been instead, and Dad would hate that. Of course, the truth was, they'd talk anyway once she flew in with a stained dress and nightmare hair that burst from its braids like straw from an overstuffed mattress. Still, better to be there than not. Sarah gripped her skirt in her fists and ran with her eyes pinned to the ground so she wouldn't miss any stray roots or holes. She was a princess by birth, but as her mother never failed to point out, Sarah was also the queen of uncoordination. She cursed herself for letting time get away. She hadn't meant to. She'd spent the morning with a sketch pad in the rose garden, specifically so she'd be close at hand while she waited for the weekly address. But then she'd heard high-pitched giggles and looked up to see two little kids playing hula hoop. Hula hoop! How fun was that? The small boy and girl each had a hoodle hook. Each had a hoodle hook and used it to roll the hoop back and forth between them. And they just looked so free and happy that Sarah wanted to capture it on paper. But then the kids ran off, rolling the hoodle hoop as they went, and the only way Sarah could finish her drawing was to chase after them. Normally, she'd have needed a cleverly crafted plan to slip away from all the servants and Rowan, the family's officially assigned keeper. But when Sarah looked around, she realized that for one blissful moment, she was alone. Was someone slacking on the job? Was someone excited about going somewhere else in the castle? Was something exciting going on somewhere else in the castle that had everyone's attention? Sarah didn't know, and she didn't care. She tucked her sketch pad and charcoals into her satchel, slung the bag over her shoulder, and ran after the kids, keeping a safe distance, of course. She wanted to catch them in full hoodle hoop action, not losing their minds over their princess. She ran until they lost their breath and collapsed, red-faced and panting and giggling in the grass, which was an even better picture than the game. So Sarah ducked into a cluster of bushes and drew as quickly as she could. When she was done, she still should have had plenty of time to get back, but it turned out that the bushes she'd hidden in were covered in thorns, and while she'd sketched, they'd hooked into her braids. The second she tried to stand, the thorns yanked her back by the head. She'd spent an eternity slowly unhooking herself and wincing and sucking her fingers as the barbs pricked her skin. But finally, she got free. And that's when the bells started bonging. Sarah stared at the castle, still so far ahead. She twisted her skirts around her fists one more time, hoisting them just a little higher. She couldn't trip again, couldn't lose more time. She just had to pass the stables, and then Sarah saw the boy a second before she slammed into him. He was nothing but a flash of black clothes and light skin coming out of the stables, and she had no time to stop before, oof! They both tumbled to the ground, Sarah flat on top of him. Which was good, she guessed, because at least her dress wouldn't get any dirtier. Hey, get off! Sorry, Sarah said. She tried jumping lithely to her feet, but the move turned into more of a rolling flop, an ungainly crawl. Then she looked down at her victim, sprawled spread eagle on the grass. She gasped, Galric? The boy's eyes grew to giant moons, and his milky face turned 5 shades paler. He scrambled up awkwardly, a wild jumble of knees and elbows, then backed away several steps and bowed low. Princess Flisara, he said, my humblest apologies. I never should have spoken to you that way, or at all. I'm sorry. Don't be, Sarah said. He didn't do anything wrong. And yet she flushed as she said it, because of course his father had done the worst possible wrong, and they both knew it. You can get up, Sarah said. It's okay. Galric rose, and he kept his head down so his stringy black hair stayed flopped over his face. He was a few inches taller than Sarah, and she knew he was a couple of years older. I should go, Galric said. People will be watching. The keepers of the light? Galric flinched so violently Sarah had to laugh. It's not like when they come. It's not like they come when I call. I mean, I guess they would, but I'm not calling. She leaned closer to Galric, her voice dropping to a whisper. I don't like them either. Now it was her turn to flinch. It was treasonous for even a princess to say such a thing. But Sarah knew better than to blurt out everything she thought, even if she wanted to. Galric looked around to see if anyone was watching. Then he said, I guess when you're a princess, you don't have to be scared of anything. I wish, Sarah said. And in that second, she wanted to tell him exactly what scared her, which was ridiculous, of course. Out of everyone, he was positively the last person she should tell anything. It's just that, for as long as Sarah could remember, everything she'd said had been supervised. Her family was around, or Primka, her tutor, or Katja, her nurse, or Rowan, or the other keepers, or just whole groups of Kalunians who hung on her every word and would pick up on anything she said or did that didn't fit into what their Princess Flisara would do. But here, she was just with Galric, and despite his dad's history, he was just a regular boy. She studied his face. He looked curious and attentive. Sarah got the feeling that if she did speak her mind, he wouldn't judge. He'd just listen. She opened her mouth to start, but then she shook her head. I'm sorry, she said. I'm late. Weekly address and all. Already started. Oh, yeah, of course, Galric said, backing away. Go, just, please, don't tell anyone you saw me. I'm not supposed to leave the manure pits during the day, but sometimes I come here for a break and... He winced and looked around again. I promised the groundkeeper I'd never let anyone in the royal family see me. If he knew about this, I'd lose my job, so please... Wait, you lose your job for letting me see you? Well, yeah, Galric said. He says I'm too disturbing. Because of what your dad did? Galric paled, and Sarah inwardly smacked herself again. Most people, including Princess Flisara, would tiptoe around a subject as big as the curse instead of blurting it out loud. Sarah couldn't take back what she'd said, but at least she could try to make him feel better about it. But that wasn't you. You were, what, 1.5? Something like that. Galric's voice was dull, and his eyes had a faraway stare. For just a second, Sarah put herself in his shoes and imagined what it would be like to spend her whole life treated like a criminal for something she didn't even do, something her father had done so long ago that it had seemed like another lifetime. She was just about to ask him if he even remembered his father when a flash of black zipped out of the stables and jumped into Galric's arms. It was a kitten, and it looked Sarah in the eye as if it were formally introducing itself. Meow! Nitpick, no! Galric hissed. He contorted himself to shove the kitten inside his ragged burlap tunic, but the kitten simply poked its head out of the collar and meowed at Sarah again. I know he's a black cat. He's not allowed, Galric said in a wild rush, but he's not magic, I swear. I didn't think he was, Sarah said. The keepers would, so you're smart to keep him hidden. I don't believe everything they say about black cats and left-handed people and twins. I don't think they're all evil. A thrill ran through her body, and she had to catch her breath. That was the closest she'd ever come to sharing her actual truth with an outsider. Had he noticed? She pretended to stay focused on the cat, but flicked her gaze up to see Galric's face. He was looking right at her. Me neither, he admitted. She smiled, and he returned it, and Sarah's heart pounded as she wondered how much he really understood. Then he broke her gaze and gently pulled the kitten out of his tunic. He held it out for her to pet. His name's Nitpick. Aw, Sarah cooed. She leaned forward so she was face to face with the kitten. He licked her nose. Oh, so cute, she exclaimed. And raspy. She rubbed her nose to get the strange sensation off her face, and then she leaned close so the kitten could lick her again. Ding! It was the higher-pitched bell, the one that rang out every quarter hour, the one that meant she was a full 15 minutes late for the weekly address, and she was still a long way from the castle. Blast! She cried. Blast, blast, blast! I gotta run! She started forward, and Galric moved to get out of her way, but somehow sidestepped into her way, and she thumped into him and the kitten again. Meow! Sorry, Nitpick. Sarah tried unsuccessfully to step past Galric again and again, but each time they accidentally danced into one another's path until finally she said, Stay! Then she raced past him, but somehow a pulled thread on her dress had gotten caught on his tunic belt. It snagged her backward after just 2 steps. Aha! She wrapped the string around 2 fingers and yanked it apart, then took off for the castle, being careful again to knot her skirts around her fists so she wouldn't take another spill. She sped back into the rose garden, where every bush seemed to reach out with its thorns and grab her hair, her dress, and her arms. Ow, 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 she yelled, but kept on running. Breathless, she stormed through the front gate of the castle. The royal guards tried to hide their dismay at the sight of her, but they didn't do a very good job. Yes, yes, I know, I look amazing. She had a similar retort for every servant who gasped and groaned and leapt out of her way as she ran past, and even choicer words for every side table, ottoman, and chair she bumped into on her way to the throne room's turret. She stumbled up the long spiral staircase, the royal entrance, which seriously didn't feel royal so much as torturous for her already screaming legs. She was panting so hard the echo rang in her ears, and she caroomed off the walls, so tired she could barely keep her balance. Finally, she emerged into the throne room, pushed through the purple curtains that hung behind the thrones, and spotted her father out on the wide balcony, addressing the crowd below. Her mom wasn't with him, which was weird, but also a relief. Queen Latanya would not take kindly to Sarah's current disheveled state. The keepers of the light, however, were there. Ruin stood several feet behind the king and off to the side where the crowd couldn't quite see him, while Grossalor, as always, stood right out there on the balcony with the king, glowing like a second sun. "As for Princess Flisara," King Edwin said, "I know you were all hoping to see her." "And here I am," Sarah shouted, flinging herself out between the two men. With so much momentum, she folded double over the balcony railing. The crowd gasped, but King Edwin quickly grabbed her around the waist and righted her. "Thanks, Dad," she said. "Ah, Princess Flisara," the king cried, and the entire crowd below echoed the greeting. As King Edwin looked his daughter up and down, taking in the exploding braids, grass-stained dress, and thorn-scratched arms, his mustache tilted upward, and Sarah knew he was trying desperately not to laugh. "My word, Flisara," he said, "when you get lost in a drawing, you really get involved with the scene, hmm?" Sarah blushed. She knew he knew exactly what she'd been up to, or at least the gist of it. And for sure, he knew she'd broken about 1,000,000 rules along the way. But Sarah could tell he wasn't upset with her about it. Grossalor, however, would not approve at all, so Sarah didn't dare turn and meet his eyes. "Why don't you give the people a few words about your upcoming Ascension Day?" Grossalor asked, loud enough for the crowd to hear. They hurrahed in agreement. Now Sarah had no choice but to turn to Grossalor. Her stomach turned. Yes, he was a hero, a savior even, said most Kalunians. They revered him. Even people outside the kingdom, like Princess Blakely from Winterglen, gushed about his valor and his dreamy good looks. But he made Sarah uneasy. She didn't let it show. Princess Flisara would show nothing but deference and respect to Grossalor. She smiled like he was her favorite uncle, then moved closer to the balcony's edge so she could see the citizens of Kaloon. She knew not everyone in the kingdom filled the massive cobblestone courtyard for weekly address. It's not like the chats were mandatory, but it always seemed like they did. From the high balcony, it was difficult to pick out many individuals. But some people always stood out, like the young woman with the impossibly long curly red hair, who always wore it loose and flowing, and who Sarah had found out was Kaloon's only female blacksmith. Or the small child who always sat on her father's shoulders and ate a banana while Sarah spoke. Or the dots of bright yellow from the scattered keepers, whose simple presence ensured that every weekly address would proceed peacefully. Kalunians, Sarah addressed the crowd. "Sorry I'm late. I guarantee you there's no place I'd rather be than with—" Her voice died away, and she squinted as she saw Galric. He was in the very back at the edge of the crowd. His head was down and his hair hung over his face, but he stood on the wooden base of one of the courtyard torches, so he rose higher than everyone else. "You!" Sarah blurted happily. She pointed, and everyone down below looked around trying to follow her gaze. Everyone except Galric himself, who immediately hopped down from the torch base and disappeared into the crowd. "Princess?" Grossalor asked, stepping closer to Sarah's side. Sarah shivered, but she smiled and moved her pointing finger in a flourish, so to indicate everyone in the courtyard. "All of you," she said, continuing it, as if she didn't feel Grossalor's eyes on her. "As you know, next week I'll turn 12, and the Ascension ceremony will bring me officially in line for the crown. Thank you so much for all your cards and letters. I've read them all, I promise. And no, Sammy Worthington from Maid Arabelle's class, I'm not scared. Prince Alistair was a long time ago, and we've been perfectly safe since then, thanks to Grossalor and his keepers of the light. May the light keep us all." The crowd cheered, and Sarah forced herself to look adoringly at Grossalor. He swelled with pride, then stepped to the center of the balcony. Thank you, everyone, and thank you, King Edwin and Princess Flosara. Shall we let them go back to the royal business? The crowd cheered again. Sarah and her father had clearly been dismissed, so they waved to their people, then walked to the royal entrance in the back of the room. Rowan didn't follow them. Apparently, he was staying in the throne room to hear his leaders speak. When King Edwin and Sarah had descended half the twisting stairs with no sign of their family's yellow shadow, King Edwin whispered, Well done, Sarah. You made Grossalor very happy. Thanks. They shared a conspiratorial smile. The king was smart enough to rarely speak freely about the keepers, but when he did, he wasn't complimentary. He thought Grossalor enjoyed his power and popularity a bit too much. Mom hated when he talked like that, and always reminded him that without Grossalor and the keepers, King Edwin's family would have died out in the dark magic uprising, and the king himself would have never been born. That always ended the conversation. But if Sarah was in the room, he'd meet her eyes, and she'd let him know with a look that she felt the exact same way. Where was Mom? Sarah asked. How come she wasn't at the weekly address? Her father shrugged. I'm not sure. She went out riding. I guess she lost track of time. Sarah snorted. Mom never loses track of time. She's always back from her ride in time for the weekly address. Not always, the king said, laughing. She doesn't come every week. When was the last time she missed? Sarah's voice cut off as she stepped on the hem of her dress and nearly tumbled down the marble staircase. Careful, Sarah, her family said, catching her arm. No broken bones before the Ascension ceremony. Or after, I hope. No broken bones, Sarah assured him, but she knotted up the bulk of her skirts in a fist and let her dad keep holding her elbow as she carefully picked her way down the spiral staircase of doom. When they made it down, King Edwin excused himself to meet with advisors, while Sarah cut through the longest hall of the castle, lined with tapestries, works of art from Kaloon's greatest creative minds, and portraits of the royal family dating back from forever. As always, the room was filled with workers, dusting and polishing, and echoed with the sound of everyone's feet against the wood floor. Sarah's own footsteps clumped in her ears as she moved farther down the hall, toward the massive gold statue of Grossalor. It sparkled like the man himself, and raised a triumphant fist while stomping down on the twisted body of the dark mage Maldovan. Sarah didn't like the statue. She skirted it and ducked into a smaller corridor. The floors of this rounded, windowless turret room were covered in a thick woven carpet that muffled sound. Sarah walked into the middle and felt the gaze of 15 suits of armor staring at the center of the room as if guarding it. Sarah looked around to make sure she was alone, then tiptoed silently to the fourth suit from the door, right-hand side. She peeked behind it, eager to see if the black panel was open, and if there were any special secrets left for her. Is it the Royal Rear End Inspection Day? Mitzi asked. Sarah quickly darted away from the suit of armor, which made Mitzi laugh. She was the palace head chef, and always went out of her way to bring the princess special treats. Sarah relaxed immediately, and she grinned when she saw the tray of cookies in Mitzi's hands. What did you bring me? She asked excitedly. Cookies, Your Highness. Yummy oatmeal chocolate chip and peanutty peanut butter. You are the best! Sarah grabbed a cookie and took a huge bite. Mitzi beamed, and for about the millionth time, Sarah thought it was criminal that Mitzi didn't have kids, because she'd be the best mom ever. Oh, sure, Sarah loved her own mother, but Queen Latanya was so regal and poised and sophisticated and correct. Mitzi, on the other hand, was short, blonde, curvy, and always said or did the first thing that popped into her mind, no matter how silly it was. Honestly, Sarah felt she had more in common with Mitzi than with her own mother. That cookie was incredible, Sarah raved. I could hug you. I'm going to hug you. She threw her arms around Mitzi. I'm totally hugging you right now. Mitzi laughed. And just this morning you said you were allergic to hugs. Sarah froze. I did? She forced a laugh. Sorry, not a morning person, I guess. She shoved another cookie in her face to shut herself up, then spoke around it. I should go. Can't y'all be looking for me? Okie dokie, Mitzi said, but take the cookies. I made them for you. Really? Thanks. Sarah grabbed the tray and sped down the gallery, wincing as she accidentally bit the inside of her cheek. She walked away as fast as she dared, down the long hall, then off to the grand staircase, which was blissfully not marble and spiral-shaped, but carpeted wide and straight. She tromped up to the massive gilded wood door of the family residence, which she flung open and accidentally slammed into the wall. She jumped, but somehow managed to keep all the cookies on their tray. When she finally got to her room, all she wanted to do was flop onto her bed and go limp. Instead, she threw open the door and screamed because she nearly collided with a girl who looked absolutely identical to her in every way. I will stop there. And again, the book for today was called Twinchantment by Elise Allen. We have this book at the library, so if you'd like to find out what happens and how it ends, you can check it out from us. Also, if you'd like to join us for the live story starters, we do a story starter every Wednesday at noon. And you can sign up at our website, www.dubcolib.org, and look for Story Starters Upper Elementary. And you can sign up right now for February, March, April, or May to join us every week for the live Story Starters. Thanks for listening in. Hope you enjoyed the story. See you later. Bye.